Hello. In a change to our scheduled program, where we're going to be talking about media, because it's been a fucking hell of a week for all sorts of reasons and all sorts of people. So, good evening, brothers, sisters, non-binary hipsters. This is McKenna Gonzo podcast, episode 6, media. As always, it's unscripted, unplanned. I haven't really thought about it, to be fair. Just came out with a title and we go from there. That's kind of how it works. So media, yeah, okay, right. This past couple of weeks has been quite mental. Witnessing firsthand how it's that official narrative stuff, you know. So there is a line, a narrative that TV news and print media have already in their minds, and then the events that happen, they squeeze those events down that avenue to fulfill the agenda that they've already got. So my experience of this in the past couple of weeks has been a couple of protests that I've been on. It's not me virtue signaling. It gets pissed off quite a few people, if I'm honest. Quite a few people have said how disappointed they am in me for giving a fuck about things. That's by the by. My reason for bringing it up is that some fuckers nicked my water. No, there it is. They just hit it. The reason I bring that up is because, this Saturday just gone, 40,000 people, easy 40,000 people in the city, Trafalgar Square. It was, for me, the reason I was there, it was to register my displeasure with the COVID Act and its renewal. So that was my reason for being there. There's lots of other reasons for being there, but it was around that sort of stuff. Now, it was a peaceful protest. Really quite cool for the majority of the day. It was a legal protest too. Apparently the risk assessments were done, the forms were put in, protests are exempt from that rule of 6 that's been brought in. So it was a legal protest, quite within our rights to do it, quite safe as well in those senses. And police were happy with it, and they were happy with it all day long until the final speaker came on, and then they stormed the crowd. Okay, now when we first got there, I was like, "Wow, this is really cool. There's not many gathers at all. It's peaceful. It's cool. They're not having a big presence. They're quite talkative, chatting with a few of them, chatting with a few health workers there, you know, first aiders, that sort of thing. Everything seemed really, really groovy. I spoke to a friend. I was like, no, this is grand. Considering that the weekend before, it was quite publicised that somebody had been battened, hit the ground, claret everywhere, rumours that he died. So there was a real undercurrent, and from other people I spoke to that were there. It certainly felt like it was a much more peaceful thing to be at. So the police really mob-handed, absolutely. I wouldn't be surprised if there was 1,500 of them. Wouldn't be surprised. There was just neon vests everywhere. And they stormed the makeshift stage to take away the equipment. And they stormed the people that were sat there quite peacefully. Women, children, old people, men as well, of course. You know what I mean? Every sort of, and this is what was quite interesting. Every gender, every nationality, every race. You could easily say it was a really good cross section of society. And the reason that I'm so keen to highlight this is because when I done protests years ago, it was the same type of people doing them. We all looked like hippies. We all had, believe me, I had long hair years ago. Beads and bangles and bracelets and heavy jumpers and Doc Marten boots, and we all looked the same, and we all thought the same, and we all smelt of incense and weed, you know. And now you're standing next to somebody who's been in a tanning salon that day, got their eyelashes done, and you're standing next to somebody who's a lecturer, you know. Not necessarily a left-wing lecturer either, these sort of radical leftists, not necessarily that either, but straight people. So that was really, really fascinating that they've got such a cross-section. It shows that there is interest in the themes that have been brought up in the rally. So yeah, they were the type of people that the police came and stormed. So again, we saw that firsthand. Now, media, the line was always going to be that conspiracy theorists kicked off and injured police officers. It was always going to be that, because that's the story that gets told all the time, and that was a narrative that was put across in mainstream media, and that's kind of it all the time, isn't it? You know, I think certainly with Black Lives Matter movement, we've seen a lot of the media focus on the damage that's been done, which undermines the philosophies of the movement, potentially. Climate change protesters, all that sort of stuff. They always to focus on the negative, and then that gives that story of upstarts, you know, involved in civil disobedience, not as a political thing, but just because they want to cause trouble, which reinforces the status quo, doesn't it? It reinforces the you know, listen to the government, you know, pay your taxes, get to work on time, which reinforces the status quo. So the media is pretty fucking shit up for doing that, towing the party line, bringing the official narrative, and it's always been the way it has. Now, a lot of us have a lot of this country have registered to or deregistered our TV license to withdraw our support for the BBC. And the BBC was always an interesting sort of institution, because it was another arm of the government, essentially, in terms of how it had a remit to educate and entertain, which is great. There's loads of drama, that's fine, that's part of that remit. Also, it had a lot of documentaries. Now, those documentaries, we really have to, history is told by the winner. Yeah, it's that simple. Do you know what I mean? You rarely get a pragmatic view of what had happened at any given time, because it's done through the lens of the victors. It's done through the lens of the establishment that need to tell it in a certain way. So a real conspiratorial, if you like, but a very critical way of looking at the British Broadcasting Corporation is that it was another arm of the government, propagandizing, if you like, the party line. You know, so whatever the establishment was at the time, that's kind of the undertone of that entertainment and education would. That's what the BBC would be. So, yeah, in this day and age, any sort of state-run media harks to makes us think of like a communist dictatorship. You know, this radical left that absolutely blanket controls what everyone thinks. Of course, that's not what we. You know, our modern society in the West believes that that's a terrible thing and we shouldn't go down that route, and therefore we don't want anything to replicate that, because that would be awful. And of course, that we kind of got that. We have kind of got that with our media. So there's a lot of us that are deregistered with the BBC. I think one of the reasons that we've that a lot of us have done that is the support for paedophiles in positions of power. Highlighted by Jimmy Savile, but as it came out, people knew about it for years, and it seems like there was something endemic in the structure, in the power structures of that corporation, that protected and even maybe not promoted, but it certainly gave an environment where it was safe for these paedophiles to operate without cause for concern in terms of them being rumbled. You know, there was not many of them that were really sort of brought to court. Now, a lot of those have happened recently and come to light, and the list is immense. You know, it's not just celebrities; it's people that work behind the scenes. You know, the whole structure, and the list is immense of people that have done that. Now, of course, that's an embarrassment. It's not just an embarrassment for that one entity, the BBC, because of course, if you're a runner, if you're a camera operator, sound person, you tend to work in a lot of different areas. Now, if that's your industry, you kind of want to protect the industry, yeah? So even though it is the BBC, we can all slate the BBC for having that, actually it looks bad on the whole of the TV industry, the whole of that one area of media. So, of course, it's presented with this very simplified narrative that there was one monster. who done monstrous things. Instead of navigating that space where it actually was a network of monsters, and I think that's key to the reason that a lot of us have rejected the BBC. We've seen that they protected these people. There was a network, that the whole of the mainstream media, mainstream television media, is complicit in allowing that to happen, and then not rigorously checking that there are measures in place to prevent that from happening in the future, and certainly didn't go anywhere near enough that we'd like to see to out these people and punish the fuckers, really. Do you know what I mean? Send them away, start new, start afresh, and make sure that shit doesn't happen again. We haven't seen that in the mainstream media, in the television mainstream media. So we've become very disillusioned with that. And of course, a lot of us are looking at alternative medias, not just for our entertainment, because of course you've got, there's Amazon Prime, there's Netflix, and given all the adverts for the streaming sites there, and there's many more. Disney was the big one that sort of launched recently. There's a lot of the American ones, Hulu and HBO, all those sorts of things. The premium ones that you can get. So Sky came in and made things very different during the early 90s, I think, something like that. And we went from having historically 4 channels. I remember, because I'm so fucking dinosaur, like I remember when there was the test card, the little girl with a little puppet and bars of colour behind her and a fucking white noise sound. The telly, that's it, it's off. You're not having any more of this shit until the morning. And that was kind of the thing. I know it was about like how much the content they were managing to produce at the time. They couldn't go 24/7, 7 days a week, 5 days a year. They couldn't do it. They just did not have that level of content. But it was a healthy thing, It said, like, there's the cut-off point. Go to bed, and wake up and do something healthy. Do you know what I mean? So it was a good thing that they did that, and they certainly don't do that anymore. So we went from 2 channels to 4 channels, and that became more commercial, and people could compete for viewers. So we became ever more populist in our mainstream television media, because it was competing to grab the most, and that's certainly where politics is, isn't it? Let's face it, it's populist stuff. You know what I mean? The problem is with popularism is that it starts to dictate what is popular and then homogenize people's views of that. It gets us channels down a certain route and tells us what's popular. So things like I don't even watch them, so I wouldn't know. Geordie Shore, I think, is one of them. Celebrities fucking in the woods or whatever it's called, that sort of thing. Britain's Got Talent, all that sort of stuff is it's safe and it's pretty and it's current in terms of pop culture, and it's it's okay for everyone to watch. It's kind of the principles behind it. I think there's something that's deeply superficial. That was Andy Warhol quote. I love that. It was deeply superficial about this, in that what people's makeup and hair looks like isn't really relevant to our deeper existential experience of being human. But it's okay to get into for a gossipy point tomorrow, But I think there's something that's deeper in there. It sort of dulls us and it dumbs us down, So yes, you had other competing for that, and then I think it was in the early 90s, perhaps the late 80s, and Sky came in, and then later cable companies, and then we were just awash with television media. We could watch it 24 hours a day. There were a million channels we could go through, a million different food groups, and it turned from something which had, by default, it had a community sense to it, because you couldn't record shit, so you watched it live. Later there was video recordings and stuff like that. But essentially, you watched it live. You couldn't pause it if you needed to go for a piss or make a cup of tea. You fucking missed that bit. You come back in and what happened? Did Shirley smack Phil in the face, or what the fuck happened? You know what I mean? Whatever it is you were watching at the time. Or did David Attenborough have sex with that lion? It looked like he was going to. He was really up for it, and the lion was giving all the signals as well. But I had to go for a piss. So I don't know. Did he? Just a blowjob. Okay, fair enough. Gutted. Perhaps we'll do it in the next episode. I'll have a piss beforehand. So we didn't have the capacity to to have our control over what we were watching, like we do today. And of course, next generation coming through don't know. They don't know they're born with what they can do. They don't know what it was like to not have the control. So there was this community thing for it, in that everybody watched the same sort of thing. So it was a talking point at school, in the office, on the work site the following morning. So there was, conversely, there was some sort of cohesion to society because we had the option of doing that. One of the ones I remember was I think it was the Tyson Bruno fight. I remember when I was at school, and there was loads of hype around it. And Bruno got levered. He had a good go. I think he rocked him, from what I can remember. But he was levered. It was always going to be the way. Tyson was a fucking animal. But in the school, everybody was talking about it. Even if they didn't have any interest in that, somebody that they knew had an opinion on that, and therefore it was this cultural phenomenon because it was that way. Of course, we haven't got that nowadays because there's so much content out there. Still in the mainstream television, there's so much mainstream television media content that it's very. It's not typical for people to say, hey, I watched this last night. We do get fads and trends. During lockdown, the entire Western world all thought Carole Baskin was a fucking arsehole. So we do get trends where that sort of happens. But you have to opt into that. It's not in your full food groups for the evening. You have to opt into that. Which is an interesting way of doing it, but it's certainly different from what happened before. So yeah, mainstream media television has certainly changed, and the way that we consume news media through television has certainly changed as well. News media certainly used to be a couple of hours a day, split up at certain peak times. So I'm sitting on my bed in lieu of an actual office, and it's creaking quite a bit, which is nothing erotic there. I'm just a fat bastard. So yeah, news was taken into little chunks and delivered through the course of the day. You knew it was going to be like 10 o'clock. You know it was going to be 6 o'clock. And you tuned in to find out what was happening in the world. And now we've got 24-hour news channels and multiple 24-hour news channels as well that are rolling with a story. So they then have that same pressure, like we were just speaking about, of competing for viewers. So we've gone down an ever more sensationalist and popularist news media on television because they go in for the biggest viewers. And on that, we come up with terms like slow news day now. So they invent some shit, and we used to when it was divvied out in little packets during the course of the day for us to get into. There were things like your weather was going to come on at a certain point. Each story had a select amount of time, and they'd tell you some really fucking awful stuff. And then they'd finish off with, Linda down the road has made a hat for her kittens. And then we go to the weather, and then we move on with our fucking lives, and it was great, So of course you haven't got that structure to it anymore, that sequence that it needed to set with in that half an hour slot or hour slot. It's 24/7. So now we're looking at a news media which is having to generate a certain level of narrative within its story. It has to fit those, and it's often like the myth stuff, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? It's often sort of one singular, Western myth certainly, one singular hero overcomes some sort of evil. And not to bash on about politics as well, but since we've had this pandemic, I thought it was really interesting that terrorists were furloughed. And it's almost as though the narrative is that we have to be afraid of something. And when there was a fear that we could tag our visual media onto, that was more universal than the threat of terrorism, then we moved that fear out of the mainstream news media, which is interesting. Tinfoil hats and all that sort of stuff, but it's just interesting to think about, isn't it? So our news has got to a place where we're not necessarily trusting it because we can see how it's just story time rather than actual reporting. And the whole reason for calling this Gonzo was my attitude towards journalism. You know, I love Hunter Thompson. I love the fact that he puts himself in the story that becomes a subjective telling of objective facts. You know, I always loved there was a rumor in Albuquerque that this presidential candidate was doing a certain thing. I was doing a certain drug, you know, and I knew there was a rumor because I started the rumor. I fucking love that. It's genius, you know. So there was an honesty about, like, you know, I put myself in the story, and this is how the story evolved with me in the center of it. And that's which is what's happening with journalism now. But there's a dishonesty about it. There's a dishonesty that says, you know, me and what I present is objective, and it fucking isn't. And we're presenting the story as we find it, which it fucking isn't. The person that's making that package and the whole crew that's involved in making this new story appear does so with a set view of how the narrative is going to play out. So they are embedding themselves in the construction of the story, but without any honesty. They're presenting it as though it's objective fact. They're presenting it as though they are reporting on something which has happened, rather than they are influencing something which is happening to fit a certain set of criteria for a story that they're telling. So we don't fucking trust the news media anymore either. We don't trust the entertainment of the mainstream 4 channels because it kind of, you know, led us down a route. And now we've got every fucking channel in the world. But we even get to a point where we dislike that. There's this thing recently about cuties, which was really fucking controversial. I've always, you know, I studied film, actually, you know, full disclosure, I studied film, I taught media, so I should know a little bit more about it than other people, in the sense that I've done more learning around it. However, there was no fucking smartphones when I learned it, so you couldn't make a movie in the palm of your hand and then distribute it to the entire world when I was doing it. So it has changed exponentially, and that would be like somebody who just invented the wheel trying to tell you about combustion engines. It ain't the same fucking world, right? So full disclosure, I've done all that shit. However, it's like chocolate fire guard. It's absolutely fucking useless in today's world. I don't really know enough about the workings of it to have an opinion, but that ain't going to stop me because I have a fucking opinion about everything, you know? So we don't trust all this shit. The cuties happens, even though I was quite happy to, you know, court controversy and look at things objectively and go, hey, it must have been. Nah, man, it was a film. It wasn't a documentary. It wasn't a fly on the wall sort of thing, which is what I initially thought it was. So I'm making the assumption that we all know what I'm going on about here, you know, which is terrible. The assumption of knowledge, the assumption that what I know, you know too, is an awful thing that goes through our time, and it causes a lot of problems about social media, which we'll talk about a bit. So we shouldn't do that. Naughty, bad McKenna, don't do that, motherfucker. Stop it. I've just done it. I ain't taking it back. And we looked at cuties. I looked at it with a cautious eye. And then more stuff came out before it even aired. And it seemed awful. And Netflix gave an apology. And then they aired it anyhow. And people were disgusted. And rightly so, they were disgusted. And that started a movement to cancel Netflix, you know, in the cancel culture. And some of that's cool. It's one that's, you know, boycotting something is a really good way to make people fucking listen. You know what I mean? I don't like your shit. I ain't going to buy it. Okay, right, we'll change it then because we can't have you not buying it. Boycotting something is a really good way of doing it. So they've lost I'm pretty sure it's in the billions that they've lost over people cancelling the subscription and moving on to either another subscription service or find an alternative media somewhere. Which is a really good way of showing that we can have something, but we can have some control over what it is we consume. Whereas, you know, conventionally, it was sort of fed to us and guided by advertisers. So alternative media is happening. We're watching this on YouTube, fucking wonderful platform that's taught loads of people a load of stuff and also wasted a hell of a lot of time looking at videos of people squeezing spots at the early hours of the morning, or, you know, watching dogs on skateboards. This is a wonderful waste of time, but also an incredibly democratizing tool to learn and to disseminate information, so to teach too. There is a lot of criticism about demonetization and deplatforming. So people with controversial views will suddenly get their advertising revenue pulled from them. They won't get the money in. They'll get threats, you know, strikes for copyright infringement, or strikes for community standards, and then they'll get that pulled. But largely, it's largely I've seen some stuff on there that is interesting. You know, there are different versions of YouTube for more freedom of speech motivated bloggers, videographers, interviewers, whatever. People are sort of more interested in that. There are alternatives to YouTube, but I'm still confident it's a pretty good platform, which is why I use it, of course. So we move into an area where we no longer have to have our entertainment or our documentary or our interviews dictated by adverts. Okay, so a half-hour program was equated to about 22 minutes. So the rest of that was in advertising. You know, cut straight through the middle of the program and cut at the end of the program. So of course, whatever you're making had to run smoothly for 11 minutes, you know, with some sort of arc of storyline and plot happening there. Have a little break to listen to whatever it is that we should be fucking eating or wearing that week, and then we go back in and it's nicely tidied up in the subsequent 11 minutes, and then on we go to the next trait that they wheel out. So we've had a radical change in that, because now we can have something that's more open to long form. So things like the Joe Rogan podcast, I mean, that dude can talk to an interviewee for 3-4 hours if necessary, you know, and people are buying that, they're tuning into that, they're consuming that. It's something that I'd like. It was one of the reasons why I was happy to do this sort of stuff on YouTube, because I could do long form talking if I wanted to. I could do 20 minutes and fuck off. I could speak for 3 hours if I absolutely wanted to, and that was cool, because you either choose to go into it or you choose not to, and that hasn't got anything to do with advertising revenue. It's just how much time I want to dedicate to it, you know, and how much time you want to invest in it by listening to the shit, you know. But it gives us something that's much more there's much more freedom in that formless presentation of media. When you can talk for hours, you can discuss things with people for hours at a time, or there's no time constraints on it. I think that's what's the important thing. So that opens things up to a really, really different way of engaging with the content of our media as media changes. Yeah, so there's an into sort of alternative visual media. I think the print media is something which is really, really difficult. I think, you know, newspapers and magazines have been on decline for quite some time. Although people still like the idea of flipping through things, you know, people still like a tangible physical thing in their hands. I read books. I read all the time. It's my favorite sort of media. Read them on a Kindle, read them on a device. I've got a couple of books on my iPhone. However, I still like the fucking smell of them. I still like going into a charity shop and rooting around for something which is a bit unique or a bit quirky, you know, something that you wouldn't really that wouldn't get punted at you by like an Amazon or an eBay or something, because it's the algorithm is read all your fucking your preferences, so it sort of targets you with like things you want. You know, you can go and have a root around and grab your own media which you wouldn't necessarily come across before. So that's all really cool, but it is on a decline. People having stuff in their hands is on a decline. You know, we're much more sort of immediate and throwaway with our media. So we flip it on, we scroll past and it's in our hands, and that's how we access things now. And certainly music has gone down that route much more. I'm old and I still buy CDs, and people think that's really strange. And like, what's stranger is we used to have fucking cassettes with them on. Okay, what now? So of course that's all changed. Movies. Now there's another thing. That's changed how we're watching movies. Cinema is still a big thing, but it's a big thing because it's got that social element to it. I think in terms of actually watching the movie, the spectacle is not something that people really are that bothered about now. The big sounds and the larger picture, because it's bigger than TV and it's different from TV, and we can sit in awe of something, and we don't tend to pause it because that would piss off everybody else in the cinema. So we're trapped for this hour and a half, and then we have to let this tale unfold before us. Now that big spectacle is kind of dying a death, but it's still got that social elements. We'll still go out to the cinema with our mates. We'll still take the kids to go and see a children's film or a family film, whatever. Or the whole date thing that still happens, I believe. Rumor has it. So there's that social element to cinema, which and it's fucking popcorn revenue that's keeping these things afloat. You know what I mean? It's not domestic movie watching. So in the home. Is largely where the revenue is coming from for people earning from that. It's not necessarily in the cinema. There's it's a drink that costs 12 quid for a glass Coke, essentially. So movies have changed as well, because we're accessing those at home, we're streaming them. Sometimes we pay for them individually, sometimes we pay a subscription and we get whatever films we want. A lot of people are doing it Moody, and you're getting a chip box or whatever, and you're downloading all these things for free. That hasn't really affected the industry. What's affected the industry is the revenue they're missing out on by having those big cinema social events because of the pandemic. So that's fucked them off and held back a lot of what would have been bigger movies. Anyway, I'm waffling on about fucking movies, so I'll stop on that, because that's we all know movies are a visual media. Yeah, they've changed a little bit over time. The spectacle is not so big now. There is a social element to it, but we've got bigger fucking TVs. We've got better sound systems. We've got 4K, 5K in our front rooms, and we can pause that shit. Go and have go and do whatever we want. Answer the door to the takeaway guy, and then come down and eat that off our lap while we're watching it. It's completely different, and we've got much more control, and we like that sort of shit. So, although it hasn't killed cinema, it's certainly changed the way that we access our movies. It hasn't necessarily changed the content. There's still popularism, giving people what we're sort of told that we want. That hasn't really changed the content of movies. We're not watching many things that are very different from what we were watching before. It's just they got bigger fucking explosions in. The visual media in that sense has not really changed a great deal over time, other than where you're watching it. Okay, so social media, I suppose, is the big thing. It's the interactive. It's about us putting ourselves in the story, which we were never really able to do. There was no way that people could work out how we could be inside the narrative and watching it from the outside at the same time. And of course, this is what social media does for us. It gives us a platform. It gives us a way of expressing ourselves while still watching this play out with everybody else. We're all involved in this drama that we invest in. It might be that we chuck a video up on TikTok. That was I am going to show my age here, because I use Facebook at the time, so that's really fucking it shows my age. And I remember when it was MySpace. You know what I mean? I remember dial-up internet. So, and that's like dinosaur shit to them. Do you know what I mean? So social media, we're all kind of involved in the making of that new sense of narratives, and it's a narrative which is much more akin to actual life, because it's not all wrapped up at the end. The things that we've grown to realize, the fairy tale ending is a myth. It doesn't happen in real life, and I think that sort of shit ruined a lot of marriages. Do you know what I mean? I think people have pinned it on what they'd seen in the Disney movie, and then when the cunt didn't turn up in a fucking pumpkin that was drawn by horses, and didn't go to a castle, and I imagine the sex was really shit on the first night too, then that exploded that myth of this fairy tale ending that we all sort of subscribe to for quite some time. And now we're kind of aware that those myths that we told ourselves are not true. So moving towards social media rather than mainstream media gives us a sense of realism because there is no tidy ending to it. There is no it stops at any point. It's just a process that goes along. So it kind of mirrors real life in that sense, of storytelling. Now I call it storytelling because even though people think that they're documenting their lives or sharing their opinion, we're doing it in a certain way. We're aware that there is a potential audience to the world, you know. So, and this is where, you know, a lot of criticisms about, particularly about parenting, come up. You know, you're acting like a really good parent because you've put, you know, the best bits of the weekend in a couple of photographs, and actually all the time you weren't taking those photographs, you're screaming at kids. Okay, so there's that. It's a very sort of common way of using it, you know. So even though we go at it as though we're documenting something truthful, we're aware that we have an audience. So we tailor our own stories to meet the expectations of that audience, you know. So actually, even though we tell ourselves it's full of truth, we're still weaving tales in there and telling ourselves and each other untruths. And social media has got this element that it can democratize things. It can give access to, and you know, I'm using social media as a go-to there, but of course we have to consider that wouldn't have been possible without the internet. So, you know, the World Wide Web is another form of media, completely alternative to what we had before, but in a completely different way. And it is now largely, other than, you know, online shopping, it's largely to disseminate personal information backwards and forwards between people in a number of different social media platforms that are only ever so slightly different. But it does give access to information in a way that we never had before. You know, largely people can read, largely people are numerate, and if they're not, then there is access to ways to become literate and numerate by accessing the internet, by accessing the World Wide Web and social media, and whatever platform you're on once you're in those subgenres of media of the web. So we've never ever before had access to so much information, access to so many possibilities and opportunities. And you know, if you've got a way of finding some wildfire and you've got a device or access to a device, you've got access to the entire world. And that's really different from any media that's ever been before. You know, in the print presses, you read what you were told to read. In sort of legacy visual media, you were shown what it was that you were permitted to show. There's a really interesting aside on that one. It's worth looking into. I believe it was Operation Mockingbird. I think it was along those lines, or Operation Mockingbird, which was I think it was a Senate Select Committee that the CIA gave evidence on that they had been involved in embedding agents in news media and entertainment. So all of the popular channels would have somebody that was sort of CIA related, that would ease things towards a certain worldview. And they were in the entertainment industry, so they would give again certain worldviews in the movies that they were playing, and you know, seed ideas and shape values through this. But you know, it's fucking propaganda. You know, I was saying at the beginning, it's no different from the communist state. It's just that we're a bit more fucking secretive about it. You know, but Operation Mockingjay, I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Have a look at that. That's interesting. So yeah, that's an interesting aside, but it wasn't what I was talking about. What I was talking about was social media. Social media's got unbelievable potential to be really fucking wonderful. The internet's unbelievable potential to be wonderful. What does it really do? Shows us pictures of fucking cats with hats on. You know, we're more dumbed down through accessing this shit all of the time than we've ever been, ever. You know, so more information than we've ever had, and yet we are probably more stupid than we have been in quite some time. Now, that's a really fucking bleak and pessimistic look for it, because actually, like I say, there's loads of ways to do this, but man, doesn't it drive you fucking nuts when you get into an argument? Somebody just wants to bait you all the fucking time. Ah, my days. And it's full of those. Everyone's got an opinion. It's like arseholes, you know, arseholes. Everyone's got a fucking opinion. And that's been part of the trouble. So everyone wants to weave their own part of the story in that and have an input to how this grand drama that we're all part of is there. But but we're maybe not savvy in how to do that anymore. You know, the conversations are much more. There's an anonymity to it. It's the keyboard warrior stuff, the safety of being one step removed from people. You know, things that people say to each other online, I wouldn't fucking dream of saying that face to face with people. You know, and some of the most nasty stuff that people have been trolled for. I remember, oh shit, I can't think of a name now. Heavily criticised for having the wrong shoes on or odd shoes on during the election. Labour deputy. I can't for the life of me think of a name. If I remember, I'll put it in the comments. If you're interested, go and find out what it was. I may remember in a minute. I probably remember about 2 o'clock in the morning when all this is well over. The trolling that happened to her was unfucking believable. You know, the death threats she got, the racism, the sexism. You know, I'm pretty sure there was one that somebody had threatened to rape her. Like, you know, you can't do that shit when you're talking face to face with someone. You just don't do it. And that anonymity, that one step removed that social media does, just allows people to act in ways that are fucking abhorrent. And you wouldn't do it if you were checking yourself, but we're not checking ourselves. You know, we're just chucking it out there and hoping for the best. So that's fucking mental. So social media has turned us into you know, we're telling ourselves a lot. We're telling ourselves that we've got this access to something which is really liberating and freeing, and yet we are becoming our own censors for that, because we're demonstrating how we want to be seen in the world, by telling telling the best bits of ourselves. Or we're falling down this hole of becoming so confrontational with people that we don't share the same views as, and they're not mediated in a way that we would do if we were doing that face to face. So by putting ourselves in the media, by putting ourselves in these storytelling, these dramas that unfold on the internet, exchanges of people on the internet, we've created these weird demons for ourselves, you know, paint ourselves as angels and we act like demons, which is, it's really fucking scary that we've done that to ourselves, you know. However, it's a bleak and fucking pessimistic episode tonight, so my apologies about that. But like I'm saying, this comes from, is what was not what I was going to do tonight. I knew what I wanted to do, but I was a little bit hung up on the particular theme, which I might come back to in a little while. But a bit hung up on that because of where I am at personally with my own recovery, essentially. I can do dependence, and that may come next week. It may come in a couple of weeks. Just depends on how I feel. Yeah, I don't mean it's not like I'm feeling like I'm going to have a relapse or anything like that soon, but I'm not sure that I'm certain enough of my position in my recovery in this past couple of weeks to go talking about it in a way that's helpful to others that are going through issues of drug and alcohol dependency. So I'd hate to give any slant on that I didn't think was love based. So I've got kind of shied away from that. So the media came up today as a theme, just because, you know, firsthand, fuck me, how manipulated was the story? How much was there a narrative of you know, sticking with the status quo, enforcing this weird assumed consensus that we've got of everyone is believing in a certain fucking thing, and that's just not the reality of it, you know. So I say that first-hand experience of that recently made me want to pick it up as a subject. And I'm sure there's loads of shit that I've missed. I'm sure there's loads of shit that I've not talked about. You know, I haven't really talked about music, and this is another form of media, if you like, that we that we consume and is really sort of life affirming, I think. So we haven't talked about that. You know, we've talked about the modern social media. Certainly haven't talked about the technology that we're interacting with, and we don't really understand how we're interacting with it. You know, it's happening in ways that's probably given them much more control than we would allow somebody to do if they were, again, face to face. So I haven't talked about that at all, but that's fine. We'll move on to that at some point in fucking whenever, really. So we discussed a couple of things about where we are with the growth and the development of television. John Logie Baird, when he invented it and displayed it to the world and was, happily giving away this really revolutionary thing of moving images in your home. In typical Scottish cynicism, he said something along the lines of, "It's fuck all on," How right was he? That was fuck all on. So yeah, the print media, I think, is largely sort of looking at its last days, where good or bad, who knows? And there's so much in that was guided people. Again, like we were saying, how news media is potentially telling a certain story to us, and not necessarily that's the truth that it's telling, but it's guiding us down a path that it kind of wants us to believe. And I think certainly print media was doing that for some years. When the Sun historically chose Blair as its new figurehead, being conservative for quite some time, and then it switched and turned to Blair, and so overnight everyone became these new Labour supporters. So there was a real power in news media, in print news media, at some point, which I don't think there is, and I'm not sure there is going to be again. So we've gone down a route certainly of the internet and social media is where we're at with things at the moment, and that anonymity is a bit of a fucking tough one, isn't it? Because I don't think we're necessarily dealing with it responsibly, although we can certainly say that it's something that lends itself to not being guided quite so much as when we just had a few options and they were infiltrated, if you like, by people that wanted to think in a certain way. So yeah, it opens up to a lot more freedom, if you like, a lot more freedom of expression, a lot more freedom of access. But it does give us it potentially makes us into arseholes. I think that's where I'm at with this. That's the experience I've had this week. It potentially makes us into arseholes. So if there's anything as a takeaway for tonight, it is that we need to choose love. Whatever it is we do, whatever it is we're watching, whatever it is we're putting out into the world, we can't just blindly attack each other over shit. That anonymity that we've got, or that presenting ourselves in a certain way that we've got, we're lacking a real integrity with that we wouldn't do if we were sort of having face-to-face relationships, which is integral to us as human fucking beings. We love one another. That's what makes things as they are. That's how we perpetuated our species. That's how we built things, because we cared enough to want to make things better for ourselves and the people that we cared for. So if there's a takeaway from this tonight, it is about let's use what we've got to build a better world, to build a world based on love and appreciation and acceptance and tolerance, and they're not necessarily fucking hippie ideals, because I'll still punch your fucking face in if you do anything that I really have an issue with. And I think that's probably the same for anybody that's protecting other people. It's just not to be sort of liberal and wishy-washy and stuff like that. We can still have integrity. That's what I'm getting at. We can still stand for what we believe in. But let's fucking love each other while we're doing it, not get bitter and competing with each other and slating each other if we don't necessarily believe in something that the other person believes in. That's cool. That's okay. We can do that. We don't have to agree with everything. But let's not be shits while we're not agreeing with it, yeah? So that's my hot take for this evening. Do it with love. Don't be an arsehole. Try not to allow anybody else to treat you like an arsehole. Don't necessarily smash them in the face. That ain't always the way to deal with things. But be prepared to if they are cunts, okay? Use media responsibly. Don't allow it to use you. And if it is not serving you, fuck it off, okay? Don't pay your license fee if you're not invested in the shit that they believe. Don't do it, If you're not liking the way news presents something and you don't think it's honest with you anymore, don't fucking watch it. Go somewhere else. If you don't like the entertainment that it's giving you because you think it's taking you down a route that you don't necessarily want to be at, it's empty and facile, and it's got values that are not pushing you forward as a human, fuck it off. Don't watch it. You've got that power. Turn the fucking thing off and move on to something else. You know, never before have we had such an option to go through all this different content. If it's not serving you, you're serving it. And we're not fucking robots. We're not units that just make profit for someone else. So if it's not doing its thing, fuck it off, okay? Which includes me, all right? If I'm not doing it for you, if I'm really fucking miserable tonight or whatever it is, I'm not actually miserable. I'm pretty sound at the moment. However, this has been a bit of a fucking niggling couple of weeks. And I wasn't necessarily confident about this subject, even though I was embedded in it for years. I'm not very confident about this because it's not something that I'm not invested in this anymore. I don't necessarily access a lot of shit. And I don't trust the stuff I do access. But if it's not serving you, fuck it off. If I'm not serving you, fuck me off. Turn to something else. Watch something different. Read something different. If you're not trusting what somebody is telling you, read another thing. Yeah? You've got access to all of that. Don't just get spoon-fed shit. Go out, really fucking research things. Don't just watch one video. Don't just read one fucking web page. Don't just download one book. Get a fucking dozen of them. There's a dozen out there for you. Really test what it is you think you know. Really test what it is you think you believe. Don't blindly slate someone and chuck it out there as though it's the truth. Really fucking get involved with things. And if you don't trust it, fuck it off. But do it with love. Do it with the ultimate goal that we're going to build a world for our children that doesn't have so much fucking hatred in it, that doesn't have so much wanton violence and destruction and greed in it. Do it with love. All right. I'll be back next week. Hopefully I'll be a little bit more fucking chirpy, because my apologies about that. It must have been like a really fucking horrible hour for some people, you know. But get with it. This is what it's like in my head. I've got to deal with it all the time. I've got to fucking wake up with this guy, you know what I mean? Or not, as I say. See you all next week. Fucking love you. Whether you've tuned in or not, I still fucking love you. God bless. Sleep safe. Have dirty dreams. Clean up after you. Ta-da, you bastards.